Welcome everyone to the Tuesday edition of our Packers News live chat alongside Ryan Wood. I am Olivia Reiner. The Packers may not have defensive end J.J. Watt. However, the Packers do have a new defensive coordinator and a new special teams coordinator in Joe Barry and Maurice Strayton. We got to hear from both of them for the very first time today, so we'll give you all of those Cliff's notes from those press conferences in just a moment. Plus, we'll also take a look ahead to free agency, which is just a couple of weeks away. Don't get too excited. If you're over on Facebook, Periscope, or YouTube right now, leave us a question down in the chat. Whatever is on your mind, Ryan and I want to hear from you. We'll get to some of your thoughts toward the end of our conversation today. A month after Joe Barry was hired as the Packers defensive coordinator, we finally heard from him for the very first time. Barry has worked under a number of defensive-minded coaches, from Tony Dungy in Tampa Bay to most recently with the Los Angeles Rams and Brandon Staley. Which scheme will the Packers defense most embody in 2021?
Well, first and foremost, there'll be a 3-4 defense. So we know that much. Matt LaFleur did mention the word multiple when he talked about Brandon Staley's scheme with the Rams, which obviously is what Joe Barry's bringing over with him. So they're going to be multiple. By the way, Mike Pettin was 3-4 in multiple. So from a schematic standpoint, there's not much difference, really. I mean, Matt LaFleur even said there's going to be some overlap schematically. Joe Barry made the point that he's going to have a lot of sub package on the field, which is a surprise to nobody that knows the NFL. It's a sub package league. They're 80% of the time you have an extra DB, whether it's a dime or a nickel on the field. So you're only looking at a dozen snaps a game, maybe, where they're going to be in base. By the way, Mike Pettin also did that. So it's very similar schematically to what they've done in the past. But they feel like their best fit personnel-wise is 3-4. So that shouldn't be that drastic of a change, and at least in terms of the basics. The big challenge, the big test for Joe Barry is going to be the coordinating part of his job, not the coaching. We know he can coach. He's been a very good linebackers coach throughout his career. His defenses, not so much when he's had that coordinating title.
This isn't Joe Barry's first rodeo when it comes to coordinator. He was a defensive coordinator for 2 seasons with the Washington football team, and then before that for 2 seasons with the Detroit Lions. All 4 of those teams weren't all that impressive. None of those 4 defenses could crack higher than the 28th ranked defense in yards, and then the 19th ranked in points. How much better can Joe Barry be as a defensive coordinator with the Packers in 2021?
Well, Olivia, you're very nice, because not all that impressive is definitely one way to put it. The reality is like it's almost impossible for them to rank worse than what they did in 4 years of Joe Barry defenses. 32nd in 07 and 08 in points and yards with the Lions. They were dead last in the 2 major statistical categories that you use to evaluate defense. And then in 15 and 16, 28th in yards, never higher than 19th, as you said, in points. You can't. There's 32 teams. You can't do much worse than that. I thought it was really interesting because Joe Barry's not going to dodge his resume forever. I mean, it was going to be brought up at some point, and he owned it. I mean, he didn't run from it, didn't hide from it. He owned it. He said that he's really proud of his scars. The reality is he's 50 years old now. He was 44, 45 when he was in Washington, and he was 12 years younger than now. He was late 30s when he was in Detroit. He said that he's learned a lot along the way. And Matt LaFleur reiterated that as well. I thought it was interesting that they had 11 hours of Zoom calls. It split over 2 Zoom interviews for their process. And those are 3 days apart. In the meantime, during those 3 days, they had 5 or 6 phone calls in all about 3 hours of conversation. So this was an exhaustive search. Joe Barry is one of 9 candidates that Matt LaFleur did confirm today. And this is also a coach that he already knew because Joe Barry and Matt LaFleur shared a staff together in 2017 with the Rams. So they were not strangers, and yet there was a lot of discussion that was brought up. Matt LaFleur said that he did look at Joe Barry's past and ultimately decided that he said he earned it. He earned this 3rd chance. The big question is going to be whether or not what he's done as a linebackers coach in this league will translate to coordinator. That's the big thing that Joe Barry's got to prove.
Speaking of things that can't get much worse, let's talk about the Packers special teams. The special teams will have a new coordinator in 2021 under Maurice Drayton, who has worked with the Packers for the last few years, not only under former special teams coordinator Sean Menenga, but also under Ron Zook, who was special teams coordinator before Menenga. The Packers special teams over the last couple of seasons, again, have not exactly been super exciting, very punchy, not making a lot of explosive plays. Back in 2020, the Packers special teams unit ranked as a whole 29th in the league. The year before that, they were 26th. How much better can Drayton make these special teams players?
It's a great question. We'll have to see. I thought it was interesting that Maurice Drayton said basically Packers special teams have never been good, and he related that to the quarterback play. I don't know how exactly. He said the bottom of the roster. It's hard to have complimentary football when you've got the quarterbacks that they do. Obviously, it's going to affect the salaries at the bottom of the roster and those things. I don't know how much of this is schematics at the end of the day, and that's going to that's Maurice Drayton's job, is the schematics side of that. He said first of all his calls and. They're evaluating right now what's going to be in the playbook. That's where they're at right now with special teams. And then once they have that, the calls are going to be based on percentages and analytics. They're going to be very analytical. Not a surprise. That's what they do. At the end of the day, the schematics is one thing. Personnel is another. I asked Brian Gutekunst today, do you have to change how you evaluate your personnel for special teams? Because where's the explosiveness? Where's the explosive? There is no Cordero Patterson on this Packers special teams unit. That guy does not exist. And he said that from a coverage standpoint, he pointed to Orrin Burks, Ty Summers, and Will Redmond as three guys that he thought would really stand out in coverage, three core guys to the special teams unit. He thought that if Tyler Urban had stayed healthy, which obviously he didn't in 2020, the return production would have been different for both kickoff and punt. He did some good things late in 2019, wasn't healthy in 2020. Even still, again, the Cordero Patterson of this group, the Micah Hyde of this group, when the Packers had some explosiveness several years ago now, I don't know that guy exists on this unit.
I use this cliche a lot, Packers fans. Patience is a virtue. Only time will tell how good the Packers special teams and the Packers defense will be in 2021. We will just have to wait and see. Before we get to that, however, free agency is just around the corner. March 17th is the very beginning of it. However, before we get to free agency, the window in which a team can designate a player as a franchise tag or a transition tag, that window closes on March 9th. General Manager Brian Gutekunst did not scoff at the idea that the Packers could potentially franchise or transition tag running back Aaron Jones, who's set to become a free agent in just a few weeks. How likely is it that the Packers get to the point where they end up using the franchise or transition tag, which is something that they don't typically do?
Just the fact that Brian Gutekunst made clear today that he's open to the idea, he was very clear that the Packers don't tag players. They don't use the tag designation. He said that that's not an organizational philosophy, that it's a case-by-case basis, and that if he feels like it's the best thing for the Packers, then absolutely he'll franchise tag Aaron Jones. So that's in play. We know that. We know that Brian Gutekunst has said that he wants to keep Aaron Jones on this team. And if you look at it from a big picture view, I mean, there's some credence, I think, to keeping him in the fold short term over long term. Running backs, when their legs go, and I'm not saying this will happen to Aaron Jones. He's a dynamic player. We have no idea what the shelf life is for him. We can't read into the future. But at that position, what we do know is that when the legs go, it's quick, it's often early, and it's very subtle. So long-term commitment to running backs in general, especially top market running backs like an Aaron Jones, it's a dangerous world to live in. So just from a common sense standpoint, it's certainly plausible that the franchise tag would be the best case scenario for the Packers, at least for 1 year. So we'll have to see. Brian Gutekunst stopped short of saying, yeah, they're franchising Aaron Jones, but he put it in play, and he if he feels like it's best for the Packers, he won't hesitate to use it.
Aaron Jones is just one piece of the Packers offseason, as they'll have to make a lot of efforts to get under what is expected to be a $180 million cap minimum. It could go up as much as to $185 million. However, substantially less than what the Packers were anticipating for years and years, as the cap kept going up and up and up. And then suddenly the coronavirus pandemic impacted the league's revenue substantially. One of the moves that the Packers could potentially make is releasing someone like outside linebacker Preston Smith, who's set to have a substantial cap hit in 2021. He underperformed compared to his 2019 numbers, posting double-digit sacks in his first season with the Packers. Second season with the Packers did not nearly reach that same number. However, he was dropping into coverage a little bit more. Based on the Packers, just the challenges that they're going to have this season, how likely is it that Preston Smith returns in 2021?
If you're someone that thinks there's no way Preston Smith is back, you're not living in reality. Now, if you're someone that thinks he's definitely back, that's not reality either. It's up in the air. And, Brian Gutekunst, I asked him today because they've already released Christian Kirksey. They've already released Rick Wagner. I asked him today how close they are to being okay with some of those moves, because there's two ways to get under the cap. You can release players and take on the dead money but save cap space, or you can restructure contracts, and there's going to be some of that, i.e. Aaron Rodgers. So how close was he to doing that? He said there's still a lot of moves that he's got to make in the next couple of weeks to get under whatever the cap is going to be. Preston Smith could be one of those moves, but he was asked directly about that today, and Brian Gutekunst said that, he not only does he view Brian Gutekunst as a guy who's under contract, and they at this point expect to be back next year, but he didn't read too much into the production dip. Preston Smith's sacks and pressures were down last season, but Brian Gutekunst pointed to that's exactly what Preston Smith's career has been like. Back to Washington, his sack and production it was a wave. It went up and down each year. He thinks that there's a lot that he does as a lengthy edge defender, not just in the pass game, but also as a run defender. Really his length brings a lot to the defensive front. And he made it very clear that he expects Preston Smith to have good years ahead of him, which why wouldn't he? He's going into his age 29 season. So he's still on the right side of 30. He's a young player. He's been productive. There's a lot of reason to believe that Preston Smith could be back despite what happened in 2020. And, oh, by the way, even if he's not, there's a lot of reason to believe that Preston Smith should have a very good 2021 season. It's not time to write him off in his career. I don't get the sense that the Packers want to do that. That doesn't mean he's definitely going to be back. There's going to be some tough decisions to be made from the cap standpoint, but they certainly did not give up Brian Gutekunst did not give up the vibe today of a guy that has soured on Preston Smith's future.
Will Preston Smith be back in 2021? Will a different Packers player be a cap casualty? Plural. Maybe there will be multiple cap casualties because of the decreased salary cap this year. If you have any thoughts on that, let us know right now over on Facebook, Periscope, or YouTube. We want to hear from you. We'll get to some of your comments right now. Let's start with Mike over on Facebook. It's so good to see everybody. Mike says, love JJ Watt, but pass on the price tag. The Arizona Cardinals signed JJ Watt to a 2-year deal, $23 million guaranteed, a $31 million deal total, potential earnings for him to be gained. That's a lot of money, Ryan. How likely is it that the Packers were ever really interested in Watt and able to compete at that price point?
I'd say not to extremely not likely. I'd go on the latter end of that as well. That was never going to happen. And, oh, by the way, if you were surprised that it came down to money for J.J. Watt, welcome to the NFL. I get that he was saying that he wants to win. The Arizona Cardinals are going to win. That's an up-and-coming team with Kyler Murray, Hopkins. Obviously, J.J. Watt knows pretty well. They've got some defensive pieces. Are they the Packers? Are they, are they a top contender? No, but every year in the NFL, you see teams go up and down. It's a league based on parity, and right now the Arizona Cardinals arrow is pointed up, so there's every reason to think that adding a J.J. Watt could help that. And it comes down to money. These guys don't do it for free. They want to win, but they don't want to win for free. They want to get paid to win. It's a business first. That's the way that it works in this league. So especially a game like this where you go through all the rigors that J.J. Watt has gone through, all the injuries, it was always always going to come down to the money. Because of that, the Packers were never really all that viable. Did they have interest? As much interest as you could have, knowing that it's never going to happen. And that's the reality of where the Packers stood with J.J. Watt. It was never going to happen.
Thank you so much, Mike, for your question. Let's go over to Mitchell over on Facebook. Mitchell says the Packers need to have fast hybrid linebackers to run a 3-4 defense. How do the Packers view their linebackers currently on the roster in second-year players, Chris Barnes and Kamal Martin, as they come into their second year and look to take another step in a new defense?
Yeah, I asked Brian Gutekunst specifically today if he's changed his mind on the necessity of having stud inside linebackers, and he pointed directly first and foremost to the pass rush. So that's where he's at, and you get it. Look, in this league, it's a passing league, it's a quarterback league. The quarterback is everything, and if there's a secondary aspect to team building and to contention, it's affecting the quarterback. So it starts with pass rushers. But if you look around the league at the best defenses, and not just Tampa Bay, which has two studs, obviously with Devin White, Levante David, but you look at some of the best defenses in the league, 49ers last year, Fred Warner, Indy with Darius Leonard. The Seahawks have built earlier in last decade, they built some championship teams. Bobby Wagner was in the middle of that. A stud inside linebacker goes a long way. Do the Packers have that guy on their roster right now? It's a little early for both, but stud, that's a high threshold to be compared to those guys. You can be a very good inside linebacker and not be those guys. So it's tough to say that they do. That's a position where they'll probably be looking to add some talent, and it doesn't mean that talent will be there to be added, but they could get better there. There's no question.
Thank you, Mitchell, for your question. We appreciate it. Let's take a question from Josh over on Facebook. Josh wants to know if there's a chance that running back Jamal Williams comes back. I'm assuming you're talking about Jamal Williams, not Tramon Williams, who spent some time with the Packers on the practice squad.
Dexter Williams, a lot of Williams.
There's a lot of Williams, but I'm assuming we're talking here specifically about Jamal Williams, who becomes a free agent in just a couple of weeks. We talked a little bit about Aaron Jones and his uncertain future with the Packers. At the moment, the Packers really only have A.J. Dillon under contract, second-year running back going into 2021. Dexter Williams, potentially, he is coming back on a futures contract after being released late in the season. What is the Packers' running backs room going to look like in 2021?
Well, first of all, you're a lot better than me, Olivia, because when I saw that question, my first thought was Chance Williams. He doesn't play for the Packers. Like, who's Chance Williams? So, all right, so Jamal Williams. I would say Aaron Jones is more likely to come back than Jamal Williams. That would be that's more of a guess than anything, to be honest. But just Aaron Jones and his dynamic ability, he's got to be the priority. Just like in the offense, who's the priority in the offense? It's Aaron Jones. And so, yeah, I get the idea of if you can't keep Aaron Jones, A.J. Dillon and Jamal Williams is a formidable 1-2 punch, and that's certainly true. Some team, I'm going to say some team will pay Jamal Williams more than the Packers will, and that he'll be elsewhere. Doesn't mean that's not reporting that he'll certainly come back. That would be my guess as of March 2nd.
The Packers fans at home are throwing tomatoes at your screen, Ryan. They don't.
Yeah, we're putting it on video, so I'm totally screwed. Just because of that, Jamal Williams is definitely coming back now. As it's on video, so of course he's going to come back. I think that some team will pay him more.
If you come here for rainbows and optimism endlessly for everything related to the Packers, you've come to the wrong place. You don't know Ryan. Thanks so much, Josh, for your question. Let's go over to YouTube now. Quinn wants to know if we see general manager Brian Gutekunst targeting cornerbacks in free agency, the draft, or both. The Packers are potentially losing one of their starting cornerbacks in Kevin King, who's set to become a free agent in just a couple of weeks. Where is the depth behind him? And if it's not there, how can general manager Brian Gutekunst build upon what's already there at cornerback in any of these two combinations?
Well, there is very little depth behind Kevin King and Jair Alexander, obviously. Shannon Sullivan was a solid third corner. I don't know that he's a second corner. And even still, you need more than 2 corners anyway. As good of a pick as Jair Alexander was, the pick after him, Josh Jackson, that's hurting this defense right now. He's a healthy scratch. Yeah, that's what he is at this point in his career. That's a second-round pick that you expected to be a player, and he hasn't been. So they're absolutely going to be looking for corners in free agency and draft anywhere that any rock that they can turn over to find a cornerback. That's to me, that's their biggest roster priority. Their biggest offseason need starts at cornerback. And I feel like every single one of these NFC Championship game losses has a way of kind of revealing where to go next and exposing the deficiencies. What did this NFC Championship game loss expose? That this team needs cornerbacks behind Jair Alexander. They need more talent there. Even Kevin King, which I don't think was a lot of people would have expected it. Kevin King had a really solid year when he was healthy. The injuries have been a major issue with him, but when he's been on the field, it's been a better defense, and it was not that way against Tom Brady. So, yeah, they need a lot of help at quarterback, no question.
Bernard says over on Facebook that he is still getting over that NFC Championship loss. It has been now weeks and weeks since the loss.
It's March.
He's still taking it kind of hard. It's okay, Bernard. We'll give you all the time that you need. Thankfully, the 2021 season is many, many months away, so you have some time to get yourself together. Hopefully, you'll feel re-inspired through the draft, free agency, whatever that might be. Speaking of free agency, we will continue to have conversations with you on Facebook, Periscope, and YouTube. We will be back, don't worry, as we get closer to free agency and the picture gets a little bit more clear. We have a better understanding of which free agents are going to even make it to the market. I see a lot of your wish lists on here. John wants to know if we can sign wide receivers Juju Smith-Schuster, Chris Godwin. There's a lot of different names I'm seeing, and we'll get to some of that and the feasibility in the coming weeks as we get a little bit closer to the beginning of free agency. Very exciting. So thank you all so much. What were you going to say, Ryan?
Yeah, Brian Gutekunst did mention today that if the right player was available, that there's some things flexibility-wise with the cap that he feels like he should do. So some of those names, that's not to say Brian Gutekunst sees any of them as the right player, but it's probably worth mentioning, Olivia, that he did say for the right player, there's some cap flexibility things that he could do.
Good news then for Packers fans. If you're looking to see a big name, it is not totally out of the picture. If for the right price and the right player, the Packers could potentially make a run for them. So we'll get into a little bit more of that in the coming week. So hold some of your thoughts until then. But until that time, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Ryan and I will see you next time.